Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled today to be here with Hawaii State Representative Amy Perruso. Representative Perruso, thank you so much again for joining us at ShePolitics. Could you just start by telling us a bit about your background, your childhood, and what inspired you to pursue a career in politics?
Sure. Um, I've been a public school teacher, a social studies teacher for about 20 years. And I was motivated by my experiences as a teacher to get involved with my union. Um, Especially with the passage of No Child Left Behind, I became very politicized and engaged in public policy around education. Um, and I never had any intention of going into electoral politics, um, just because teaching was my profession, and I anticipated being in that profession for the rest of my career. And in 2018, there was a movement, a national movement, the Red for Ed movement, that really inspired me to, along with colleagues across the country, to teachers, public school teachers across the country, to run for office at the state level. So there are many people like myself, people who had been public school teachers, but then became more involved in electoral system and are now currently serving in their state legislators. And I grew up in Southern California, in a small town called Fallbrook. I attended USC on a full scholarship, and um, spent my senior year in Shanghai, and then I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Helsinki in Finland for a year, and came back and did doctoral work in Chinese history at UCLA. And when I was almost finished with my doctoral work, there was some stuff going on in my personal life, and I came to Hawaii to visit, and I ended up staying here, and then spent some time surfing and waiting tables for about 6 years before I went into teaching. And it was a surprise to me when I went into teaching, because my whole family was teachers, and I understood really well um, the difficulties of being a public school teacher. So uh, yeah, it was also not something it's not my life plan. um, but I ended up falling in love with it. Um, and really becoming passionate about it, and really enjoying it. And um yeah, so that's really kind of how I ended up in the classroom and as a public school teacher, and then really as a union leader. So as one of our teachers unions state leaders, when I started being asked to run for public office around 2018. So that's kind of my background.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really cool how you transition from like a teacher to sort of getting more involved in like civic engagement. And
Mhm.
actually, it's great that you mentioned Shanghai because I'm actually in Shanghai right now. So that's really cool that you're
Really?
in Shanghai for 1 year. Yeah, so I'm from Shanghai, but okay, moving
Wow.
to sort of the more like political aspects. I've seen your
Mhm.
work on food policy and like sustainability, but could you tell us a little bit more about some of the key issues that you've been focusing on during your current term?
Sure. So I think my um issue area focus has evolved over time. And I wouldn't say that it shifted, but that it's really expanded. I came in very focused on public education and education policy. And because my district is largely agricultural, I was also interested in farm to school and sustainability, and climate change. And I think over the years, my experience in the legislature itself has, and I think that as our context has changed over the past 6 years, I've become much more focused on climate change specifically, and on good government. along with economic inequality, because I feel like we are far more brittle as a society, and we lack resilience when there are big gaps, big social and economic gaps within our communities. So I think that economic equality is going to be one of the cornerstones of resilience in the face of climate change, frankly. And then I also think that we can't really do any of the work that we need to do to make change unless we engage in um, good government reforms. So we have some issues around pay to play and legal corruption here in Hawaii, and I'm strongly motivated to address those.
Thank you. That's great to hear. And how has your experience as a woman shaped how you approach these issues that you talked about and your general approach to politics?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that what I notice in at the state legislature level, because I work with a lot of colleagues similar to myself, so progressive legislators across the country, and I've noticed a pattern for women as we enter the state legislative field, and that is that we begin working on issues where we feel really comfortable. So issues around the care economy, issues around female-dominated professions, we're really quite often found in on education committees, on health committees, on human services committees, and I think that's really a gendering of the policy spheres. But I think that as we gain experience and we understand the political system better, many more of us become more focused on finance, become more focused on the budget and economic issues, because we start to understand that we can only shift the disparate treatment of the issues that we care about by going towards the areas that have more power. So I would say as we gain experience, women like myself and gender nonconforming folks, that we might start out in really predictable issue areas, focusing on those, but then we quickly become much more engaged in, interested in energy politics, transportation politics. It's less usual to see women chairing the business development committees, but as we gain experience and we start to understand where the real power lies, then we start to move into those spaces, or seek to move into those spaces.
Okay, great. So I see you're sort of saying that like there's fewer women that's actually involved in these like greater aspects that hold more power. So what would you say are like some of the steps that need to be taken so women and, non-gender confining people, they can actually enter these spaces and, explore more male-dominated areas?
Yeah, I think that um there's a lot that has to do with our public, I mean, not just public education system, but really the way in which education itself is gendered and reproduces our existing social roles. I think that we need to do a lot more to support women to go into science, to go into more technical fields, so that we can gain expertise in those areas, because we do bring different perspectives to that work. And when women enter those fields, I feel like we are in such small numbers that it's hard for us to make a difference at a policy level. So we have so few experts, female experts or gender nonconforming experts in those issue areas, that you don't often see women in those spaces in politics. So I think that we need to just be more explicit about making sure that we are not just asking young women, like we're there's a lot of work that's been done around socialization, and I think when we start at an early age and we have the same expectations for girls and boys in terms of like their capacities, their interests, and um and we normalize treating young women in the exact same ways as we treat young men, then we're gonna find that many more of our young girls just naturally see themselves as chemists, as biologists, as physicists, you know, as engineers. And then we need critical numbers, a critical mass in each of those areas so that we can start to really have voices in those fields and then affect policy in those areas.
Got it. So it's about the importance of like education and really just like stepping in at the foundational level to make these changes.
Exactly.
So I know that apart from being a representative, you've mentioned you're also a teacher. So I'm curious to know what skills you believe are essential for high school students aspiring to become a politician, or what activities or organizations do you recommend these students should engage in?
So I'm not teaching now because in our state, if you enter into a legislative role, you have to sever, like you can no longer teach in the classroom. So, but I would say as a classroom teacher, and I taught civics, that was really my area. Um, I really encourage students to get involved in mock trial, in debate, and I coach those, activities. But more generally speaking, I think that I really tried to cultivate critical thinking and compassion and creativity, because I think all of those qualities are necessary for good policy making, and I don't think they're cultivated in our current educational system because it's really designed to um, kind of align with a system of standardized testing. So there isn't a lot of energy or attention or time that's spent like helping students find their voice, find their passion, and learn how to interact with others in a way that's like about problem solving. So I think that, oh, what teachers can do is work against the existing educational system and um, create a more holistic approach, um, a whole child approach. So, and I think for students, like what I would encourage them to do, if they're interested in politics or they're interested in going into public service, is to really um, do the work of problem solving as early as possible. I worry that a lot of some young people, not all, um, might go into it because of ambition. And I think ambition is the worst reason because you end up becoming the thing that is the problem, right? Because if you go into politics to gratify your ego, then you end up making decisions that are not good for other people, just so that you can have self-gratification. So I really think like the most important thing is to do self-work and to do a lot of reading, expose yourself to other cultures, travel if you can, but even like develop compassion by working with as many different parts of your community as you can, and serve, like just work. Like the thing is like to find your capacity that is before politics, like to figure out what you contribute. If you, let's say you aren't able to go in politics or like the electoral political system, what do you contribute to the world? What is um your gift? And if it is service, then to do that as humbly as possible. And then if politics comes your way, if people ask you to vote, then to consider that, but to have it be about a collective. Like I think that for me, it was really important that um I ran because I cared about my colleagues. I cared about public school teachers and I wanted to fight for them. It wasn't about me. And I think that this political space is so dangerous because um there is so much ego involved. And if you get involved with a motive that has to do with yourself and not about other people, then it's just ultimately very dangerous for yourself. You can become someone who's like terrible, you know? Sorry, I'm snorting, but like I've seen it happen. Even young people who are like, oh, I want to serve my community. But then if they don't stop and unpack that, like, why do they want to serve their community? What is their community asking them to do? What do they have to contribute? And sometimes, you know, you might not have done the necessary work to prepare it to come into legislative work. We need people who have done their homework, like understand policy, understand these different issue areas. Like I'm saying, like to do energy, we need people who come from diverse social backgrounds, but who understand energy, and are not relying on lobbyists or their staff to do their thinking for them, because uh those kinds of people are ultimately really weak, and they can be easily manipulated. And if we're going to have legislators, we need to have people who can think for themselves. So I would say, like, get educated, but get educated in a really deep way that's about your community. It's about the subject matter, but it's also about like being human, you know? So I don't know. That's a lot, but I think that the best legislators are really well-rounded and deep. I wish, like, I'm older. I didn't enter the legislature until I was 50, and I still feel like there was a lot of work I realized I wish I had done before I got into the legislative space. Because in the legislative space, there's so much danger of going backwards, as a person, as a human. Like, you have to be really strong and resilient. So you have to have a good self-awareness. And I mean, at this point, I'm kind of rambling, but what I'm trying to get at is that it's the best legislators are people who have done a lot of thinking and a lot of soul searching before they come into the building. Like, it's not simply about, I want to be in office. The people who are really simplistic in their analysis and their motivations, they tend to be the most dangerous people in office because they can be so easily controlled.
Thank you for that. That is really good advice for all of like the high schoolers that are watching. And I'm curious to know a little bit like more about what you said about like contributing to the community and also like finding your own purpose. What would you recommend like specific like activities or like steps for high school students to take to sort of delve into that field?
Yeah, I think that it means trying to identify like what you care about. What do you care about? What are you passionate about? And then just dive as deeply into that thing as you can with as broad a perspective or analysis as you possibly can. Like, look at how that particular issue area is affecting different kinds of people, right? So let's say like, so when I was young, my dad was trained racehorses. And so I was a professional jockey by the time I was 15. And I really thought I was going to be a veterinarian. Like, that was my life's plan. But when I got a full ride to USC, USC is in South Central Los Angeles. There are no animals there, So my pathway shifted radically, and what was available to me was totally different. Um, and that's when I became interested in Chinese history and Chinese politics. But I think that it was like I that same kind of willingness to dive 100% into a topic that I had taken with the horse world, right? And thinking about what I needed to do to prepare to be a veterinarian. So I had been in 4-H my whole life, FFA my whole life. I had owned a business raising sheep, and like I was thoroughly engaged. Like I dedicated a lot of time and energy to diving into animal husbandry and everything that that entailed. And you know, I read veterinarian books for fun, you know. So when I got to college and none of that was available to me, I just pivoted and I was like, okay, so I want to learn about history and politics and everything. And I think that it's just the capacity, the desire to learn about what's in front of you. And that will kind of lead you to ultimately whatever pathway you're supposed to take. But it's mostly an attitude. It's not really like a set of practices per se, um, except to say that it like to try to understand things as deeply as possible. I mean, I think there's a tendency to um, just not read books or you know, or like or not spend enough time like doing academic work. And I really believe in like academic work and do it like reading the books and writing the papers and having the hard conversations in class about difficult concepts and um challenging yourself and becoming a different person in that process. But you can't become a different person in any process if you're not throwing yourself into it. So I guess that's kind of what I'm recommending is this like lack of fear, like there's just commitment to whatever space you're in, commit, be in it, you know, even if it's not a space of your choosing. Like I when I went to USC, it was, I had really wanted to go to UC Davis and because, you know, I could go to vet school and, but it didn't, when those plans changed, I didn't dwell on that shift. I wasn't angry or bitter about it. I just kind of threw myself into what was possible, what was available to me. And I've always done that. And I just think that um there's I know it's not cool. Like sometimes young people think that it's not cool to like uh go all in or be like sometimes like my daughter calls me a tryhard because I'm always like uh you know, trying to do my best. I'm very earnest. Um and I think that that quality has served me well. You know, I think that that's an attitude that is really helpful if you want to um, change yourself, and really that being able to change yourself will serve others if you're in any kind of political work, because it gives you a capacity to listen to others deeply and a desire to listen to others deeply. If you think you know everything, you're not going to listen to your community. You're going to just go in the direction that you think you should go. And I have learned so much from my community because, and in ways that I actually didn't anticipate. But because I've sat in hundreds of conversations that were really deep and helpful and challenging, a lot of very challenging conversations. So but I had had a lot of practice making myself available for those conversations because, you know, I had learned how to learn.
Well, I think that is really, really great advice, what you just said. I think learning is, you can never learn too much, really. And honestly, being a tryhard, I think it's a compliment because it just means you're willing to try really hard to do what you're passionate about. And yeah, so thank you for that advice.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of like go back to women being entering the realm of politics. What
Mhm.
advice would you give specifically to young women who are scared to express their opinions or like scared to make a change in the community?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of my career really focusing on young women of color in particular who, and in Hawaii, there's definitely a cultural norm around um, not being super vocal and keeping your thoughts on the inside. And the I think that, so there's a couple of pieces there. The first is encouraging young women to find their voice, right? What is it that you want to say? And just to practice using it, because oftentimes when you practice using your voice and you test your ideas with other people, then you get feedback on your ideas and you can improve your ideas. But if you just keep your ideas on the inside, you're not testing them and you're not growing. So I think I had a really kind of constructivist approach to teaching, and my approach is very dialogical. So everything was about students kind of engaging with primary sources, analyzing primary sources, and coming to their own conclusions about what those sources were telling them. And that interpretive work is really important and also interesting and engaging. And I think that once you hook like young people into that work, and once my experience has been that once young people are engaged, and young women in particular have an additional level of reticence about exposing their ideas and becoming vulnerable in that way, because they're always taught that you should be seen and not heard, essentially. But I think that once they have that feeling of that engagement and interest, and they start to see that their ideas can really contribute to this public dialogue and this public conversation, then it's almost like um you know it leads them further in, and they can contribute more. And when as they're engaging, because their ideas are being tested and they're engaging in more conversations, and they get better at it. So then that kind of also, it's a positive feedback loop that really helps build confidence. And I think confidence is the main factor in getting more young women to run for office, because I've been doing this for a long time. And when I started teaching civics, my goal, one of the reasons I never saw myself running for office was because I saw myself as facilitating the entrance into politics of my students, in particular, young women of color, because I saw that there's such a disproportionate number of white and actually Japanese American men dominating our political system. So there's definitely, like, it's not representative of the population. So I really saw that these young women who were engaging, they had some amazingly powerful insights. And once they started engaging and their perspectives were brought into play, everything got more interesting. And so I thought of myself as helping to make it possible for their voices to come into our electoral political space. And what happened was that most of my students ended up going to school on the continent and not coming back to Hawaii. So there was this and I realized also that I didn't have the luxury of time, because as I was teaching, the things were getting worse, and I felt like, wow, if somebody does not get involved in the system itself, then there's going to be a really disastrous system left for my students to come back into and be part of. So part of my thinking about running for office was also like, okay, holding space, and they're going to come back in. But I think so this whole time, I think if you talk to anybody who knows me, they will tell you that I am very active, like obsessive about talking young women, young local women to run for office. And it's super hard. Number one, they don't have the resources because, the economic compensation for women's work or even the fields that women go into is far less than for men. And the women who have the most interesting, important insights don't come from usually families of privilege. So they don't have that social capital, right, to bring with them. And they also lack confidence. It takes so many more conversations to get a young woman to even consider to run for office. And then if you do get them to like start thinking about it and say, like, just come into the Capitol and work for a session, they find the environment to be so patriarchal and so toxic that they are like, I'm not gonna spend my life like this. I'm not gonna have my life be this kind of battle. And so and I understand that, like I have a lot of compassion for that, and that's a justifiable position. um at the same time, if we don't have folks with different perspectives coming from working class backgrounds, women, gender nonconforming, LGBTQ folks coming in and challenging the status quo, then we are just reproducing the status quo, and the status quo is not working, and it's leading us straight to disaster, in my view. So if I felt like, oh, we're doing fine, and the current system is working, everybody is prosperous, and the planet is healthy, and the system is democratic and egalitarian, then I wouldn't be constantly trying to convince young women to run for office. But I am. So I've been doing this work for a long time, and for the first time, so I've been in office for 6 years. I was teaching for 20 years before that. So this whole time, I feel like I've been doing that work. And this year is the first time that I have a former student who's running for office. And I am just giddy with happiness. Like, I feel like, actually, I kind of feel like I can retire because I feel like it's a little bit like mission accomplished, and I mean, I need to have my own succession plan in place because this position is important enough that I'm not going to just let anybody take care of my community. But um so my former student, Tina Grandinetti, is an amazing candidate. I'm hoping that she'll win her seat, but and she's running the kind of race that is inspiring people, and inspiring change. So yeah, I think it took so much to get Tina to run for office. And some of the other young women that I have encouraged and supported and pushed into running for office, I think that it's so much more difficult than asking men to do it, because unqualified men feel entitled, and women who are overly qualified and could run circles around those men and do the work of 7 of them, feel inadequate, feel like less than or not enough all the time. So it's a really difficult psychological struggle because when you're running for office, you're constantly subjecting yourself to the community's evaluation, and it's actually really hard psychological work. And if, as a woman, you're told that you just have these social expectations, right? That this is not your space. This is, a man's world. Men should have the power, and so on. Then, even if it's unconscious, even if you think that you don't think like that, we've internalized so much of that um, even for someone like me, like, I'm older, I'm highly accomplished, I'm a sitting legislator, and I'm still doing ego work and um a lot of uh self work around being in office. um and it's hard, it's really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely relatable because me, like myself, I've definitely experienced all those compliments being like, oh, well, women aren't going into these fields. And it's really inspiring that you're actively pushing people to run for office, especially colored women and women in general, because yeah, we need to see more representation in our government. I also think so. So yeah, I think that about sums up our interview. Thank you so much
Okay,
for coming on
sure,
again.
my pleasure.